Well, really, sometimes stress is evidence that my mind or your mind, body, emotions, your relationships, responsibilities, the environment around you are demanding more than you have the current capacity to handle. And so most of us have been taught to respond to stress in one of two ways. Usually it's to panic or to ignore it and push through. We override our bodies, we spiritualize exhaustion, we call burnout discipline or hustle muscle. We call emotional suppression maturity because we pretend like we don't feel what we actually feel and say that that's maturity. And then we wonder why we feel so disconnected. Welcome back to the Girl Just Feel podcast, where faith meets mental health and healing starts with feeling your feelings. I'm your host, Dr. Ajane Gaylor, and today we're talking all about stress. Yes, actually what it is, not the myths that we believed about it or what we've told ourselves, the difference between acute stress and chronic stress, and why so many of us ignore it or don't understand it and just don't even deal, and why stress might actually be inviting us into something that we haven't yet talked about. Can I tell you something that completely changed the way I now understand stress? Stress is not necessarily proof that something is wrong with you. Sometimes stress is proof that something actually really matters to you. I used to get this completely wrong. I used to feel that stress meant that I couldn't keep it together or that I wasn't good enough at what I was doing or that I couldn't handle my life. Well, really, sometimes stress is evidence that my mind or your mind, body, emotions, your relationships, responsibilities, the environment around you are demanding more than you have the current capacity to handle. And so most of us have been taught to respond to stress in one of two ways. Usually it's to panic or to ignore it and push through. We override our bodies, we spiritualize exhaustion, we call burnout discipline or hustle muscle. We call emotional suppression maturity because we pretend like we don't feel what we actually feel and say that that's maturity. And then we wonder why we feel so disconnected, why we feel so anxious, numb, exhausted, emotionally reactive, or even physically unwell. So, what if stress is not simply an interruption? What if stress is also an invitation? An invitation to what, you say? Well, an invitation to pay attention, to grow, to adapt, to reevaluate, to shift, to pivot, to adjust, to heal, to acknowledge what's been neglected and ignored for far too long. Because ignored stress does not disappear, it doesn't go away. It accumulates, meaning it builds and builds and builds. And then that's when we find us in a breakdown, in burnout, or just blowing up at everybody. So let's unpack some of the myths around stress. Like, why do we think it's so negative and so bad? Well, I would say it's because we often only experience what we consider stress or the effects of stress. So it's not the stress itself. It's not what's happening. It's usually our response or how we end up behaving or the decisions we end up making in response to the stress that we're under. So I know myself, I can be very reactive, especially in a situation where I'm prepping or planning for something. Let's just say I'm hosting an event in my home. I host a lot of my family, friends, community in my home. And I like things to be a certain way. And because I like things to be a certain way, if they don't meet my standard, I often feel a sense of high stress. And then my reaction to that is usually being very anxious, very wound up, being very explosive. And I start yelling at all my family members at all the stuff they're doing wrong. So it isn't that the event is what is causing the stress. It's the way I'm viewing the event, and it's the way that I am internalizing and even preparing for what is going to happen in anticipation of people coming to my home or having to prep something or being ready. And what I want us to do now is to define what stress actually is and not what we've been telling ourselves that it has been. One way to define stress is that it's when our demands far outweigh our resources, meaning there is a demand, there is a need, there is something that is requiring more. And at that point in time, we do not have what's needed or the resources or the access to meet that demand. That's literally all stress is. But where we often get it wrong is that we think that stress equates a lack of self sufficiency, a lack of capacity, a lack of intelligence. Like we come up with all this stuff where we determine that stress actually means something that it doesn't. It just means there's a demand that we can't meet yet. It doesn't mean we can't meet it. It may mean that we have to learn something, we have to tap into other resources, we may have to ask for help. And that's where we often fall short in our understanding of stress because we look at the demand as the problem, when really a demand is just a need for something. For going back to my event example, the event is not stress. All that comes along with preparing to host people in my home may bring on stress if I feel or if I determine that I can't meet the demand, I can't meet the resources, or the resources that I have in my family members who are helping me, or the resources that I have financially, or whatever resources that are necessary to put on the event. The event in and of itself isn't stress. What becomes stressful is how I then respond to the demand or whether or not I can survey and determine what resources I have available to me. So if we look at it from that vantage point, it actually, like I said earlier, is an invitation. And what is an invitation to? Well, it's an invitation for us to grow. That's what we misunderstand about stress. Stress is not necessarily a spotlight on our inabilities. Really, stress is saying we've arrived at the end of your resources. So now there's a demand for more. Not necessarily more than what we can handle, more than what we can do, because we don't know what we're capable of until we're pushed to our limit, until we reach the end of where we do currently have resources and capacity. So if I can view a demand and I can meet that demand, that's just our baseline. So there's a demand, I meet the demand, I'm at baseline, that's normal everyday life. If there's a demand and I can't meet the demand, that equates stress. But if there's a demand and I find a new resource to meet that demand, now that equals growth. And that's what stress really is inviting us to. It's inviting us to stretch beyond where we are and expand in capacity, expand in knowledge, expand in resources to grow to the next level. So when the demand comes up again, we'll be back at baseline. We'll be able to meet that demand. And if a new demand comes that we haven't encountered before, and it's calling for additional resources, it's calling for a new capacity, that's another opportunity to grow. Now, that seems simple. That seems very basic. But the problem becomes in that we don't even understand the differences between the types of stress we can encounter. So I'm talking in general terms about just acute stress, meaning it happens, it comes, it gets resolved, and then it goes. That's acute. And all of us are going to experience that. Mostly what I'm describing as pathological or usually detrimental to us would be chronic stress, meaning it's ongoing, it doesn't become resolved, and then it could potentially lead to more harm and devastation than it leads to growth. And sometimes we confuse trauma with stress, or we overemphasize trauma in the face of everyday stressors, everyday challenges, everyday demands, right? And we go beyond the capacity to address those stressors. And that's what trauma is. But today is not the day we're talking about trauma. We'll have to do that in another episode. So back to acute stress and chronic stress. So if we view this from the right perspective, meaning a demand comes up that we haven't encountered before, it demonstrates or it reveals our lack of resources to meet that demand at that time. We can either go in one or two directions. We can crumble under the pressure, which will potentially lead us to that chronic, ongoing, unresolved, unaddressed stress, or we can survey what access and resources we have, which can potentially lead us to growth. Now, I like the second better than I like the first, but if we can be honest, I've lived most of my life in the first category. The demand comes up, I can't meet the demand, and then I become chronically stressed out, chronically overwhelmed, or at least that's the story I'm telling myself. Because just as much as we encounter the resources, the capacity, what we need, what's available to us is based primarily on what we are telling ourselves about what we have and what we have access to. So I'll use my example of returning to school after, I don't even want to say how long I was out of graduate school before I went back. Now, I got my bachelor's degree, 4 years, undergrad, completed it, went right into graduate school, did a 10-month accelerated master's program, obtained my master's degree, and then went right into the workforce. I started doing counseling and therapy for several years and putting my career, my education right into practice. And then my agency closed and they laid us all off and I lost my job. And at the time, I was pregnant with my second child. And so the demand for income was absolutely there. My husband was working. I had been working. I had a decent salary, and I also had our medical insurance. So that meant with me losing my job and being laid off, I would no longer have medical insurance. And here I was pregnant and had a baby, our oldest child already. And that meant part of our income was going to be gone because I didn't have a job anymore. So the demand was there to, number one, meet the financial obligations, meet the needs for the medical care that I would need, as well as the baby to come and the baby we already had. And there was a demand for caring for our children. So there were demands all over the place. And the stress was very challenging because the loss of income and the loss of my job wasn't just about the money. It was also about my confidence in my career, because I was new to my career. I'd only been there for 3 years. So I had not yet developed a large client base. I had not yet developed a long enough work experience. At least I hadn't thought I did yet. I hadn't spent enough time developing my career, and here I am without work. And I'm having these children. So now there's a demand for motherhood. I'm becoming a mother. I'm learning how to care for my children and care for myself in this new stage of life. And although becoming a mother was a great experience, it also came with new demands. So the stress of that whole season really could have taken me out. But what I began to do was, as I often do, achieve highly and figure out solutions very quickly. And one decision that we made was I wouldn't return to work right away, that I would stay home with the babies once I had the second baby, and we would remove the burden, quote unquote, for childcare by me being at home. The second way we were going to meet the new demands financially was my husband and I were doing a real estate business. We were beginning to invest in real estate, that I would support him in this real estate company we were trying to start and these real estate investments we were trying to do. So that would kind of hopefully help to meet some of the financial needs. And for the medical needs, I don't remember the exact solution, but I think we might have gotten like state aid or figured out some other type of temporary medical coverage in order for me to make it through the delivery and maybe the first year of the new baby's life. So I would say that if I looked at that experience as acute stress, meaning here's some demands in life, some changes are happening, and so now I'm going to have to find new resources. I would say from that perspective, I met those demands. And so that meant I went back to baseline. But the truth is, because I was so focused on the deficits and I was so focused on the needs and what I felt like I didn't have, even though we made decisions that helped to address what I felt like were the needs at the time, I did not feel like those were the appropriate or correct or complete solutions. And so what that caused me to do was to ruminate a lot about what wasn't happening, how difficult it will be. What if we can't pay the mortgage? What if I don't have insurance long enough? How am I going to pay a huge medical bill that comes up? Like I kept rehearsing all of these thoughts and patterns of thinking that only made the deficit or the need or the demand seem bigger than me, bigger than my husband, bigger than the current resources that we had. And that's what became chronic in my life. I imagine that this is resonating with you, that you too have experienced something that should have been just a regular life event, life circumstance that caused some new demands that you met, grew from, and moved on. But I'm certain that just like me, there may be some messaging, some narratives, some beliefs that you're operating from that make it more chronic and ongoing than it should be. Now, I'm not saying that we should minimize the difficulties that we face or that we should pretend like we don't have challenges. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is a lot of what we endure has less to do with the event or the demand or the need that's presenting itself than it has to do with what we are telling ourselves about it. And if we were to change how we communicate to ourselves about what we're facing, I think a lot of it would be more manageable than it seems to be for us now, or at least I'm speaking for myself. And I just want to clarify that no two people are going to experience the same situation in the same way. So my response to losing my job was very devastating for me, very difficult for me. And I spent many years questioning my worth and value as a result of that. Someone else losing their job, facing that reality may be totally different because of their circumstances or their perspective or their beliefs. So, our emotional reserves, our support system, our physical, emotional, mental health, our trauma history, even our current sleep and nutrition and coping skills and beliefs, the environment around us, all of this plays into how we then respond to demands, to the needs, to the expectations, to the events, to the changes, to all of these stressors. Now, I often see things as our responsibilities and our relationships often equal what our roles are. And I wear a lot of hats. I have a lot of roles because I have various types of responsibilities that I carry. A lot of them are based on the relationships that I'm in. And so then that equates to the different roles or hats that I wear. And any of those three categories can lead to different levels of stress. So I don't want to minimize the impact of relationships that can bring on challenges, demands, and difficulties, responsibilities that we have, whether I'm working for someone and I have a boss, or I'm an entrepreneur and working for myself and have a responsibility to those that I'm taking care of, or whether it's the different hats that I'm moving in and out of. Each one is going to bring about certain demands or needs. And none of us are going to respond in the same way because we all bring our own story. We all bring our own experiences, coupled with the things that we were told, coupled with the things that we then told ourselves based on the events and experiences that we've had in life. And so I don't want to make it seem like stress is so easy for us to define and to describe and to deal with. I want us to begin to shift how we see stress so that it doesn't grab us by the neck and put a chokehold on us so that we're not able to breathe and function in life and feel paralyzed by every demand that we face from day to day. I want us to be free in our ability to trust God first and foremost, that He is sovereign, that He is providential, He holds all things in His hands. I want us to trust our measure of capacity, whatever it may be, that whatever demands we face, either we're going to pull up the resources that we already hold on to, or we have the capacity to find new resources. And sometimes that means we have to look to the support system that we have around us. Now, we can talk more about that in a future episode. But if we look at every demand, financial demands, job demands, relationship demands, societal demands, even those of us who attend church and serve, just demands of our bodies needs to be fed and nourished and hydrated. Those are demands too. If we view all of them as a disruption, then it is going to potentially lead us to the chronic, ongoing, never-ending, overwhelming, overburdened perspective where we never feel like we can catch our breath. I want to breathe. Let's take a moment. As a matter of fact, and I know my audio listeners, this may feel strange to hear pauses throughout the podcast, but this is my show. I can do what I want, and I want us to breathe. So I know you've probably heard of this box breathing idea where you breathe in for 4 breaths, hold for 4 breaths, and then you exhale for 8. And ironically, because I'm a trained singer, I grew up singing in choirs and received choral and classical training. We used to do breathing for the sake of singing. It wasn't until years later that I even learned that this is a practice to help people to regulate their nervous system. I was like, what a gift that when I didn't even know, God was placing me in situations where I would have to regulate my nervous system. I thought I was just singing in the choir. Well, no, I was actually learning these techniques. So I want us to do it now because I don't want stress to be such a misnomer and such this convoluted idea that we don't think we can handle it. So let's just breathe for a minute. And I want us to breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and then release for 8. And I'll do the count. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. Now exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, how did that feel? I've been recording this and speaking and all, revved up because I'm excited about sharing with you this truth and just taking a moment to breathe, really just relaxed my body. It settled my thoughts a little bit and it gave me an opportunity to just rest in the moment and enjoy what I'm sharing with you. So I want you to practice that breathing. That's actually going to be your life work for this week. I don't want the conversation about stress to overwhelm or to quote unquote stress you out, but I do want to help to shift how you see stress. And we can talk more about this in future episodes and we can cover more details about it. But what I want you to walk away with today is stress is not what you've been telling yourself. Stress is not an interruption. It is an invitation. It's an invitation to grow, to add on more resources, knowledge, wisdom, support, and strength so that when there are new demands and there are new needs and there are new expectations, you'll have everything that you need to meet every demand. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.